The country of illness has its own currency and customs. When Robert Lipsyte was diagnosed with cancer, he made several trips there. I'm Leanne Hansen. His travel tips for patients and caregivers. And play that funky music, jazz guys. John Schofield and John Medeski go a go-go Sunday on NPR's Weekend Edition.
That's Weekend Edition, Sunday mornings at 10 on WAMU 88.5 FM.
Yeah. What the hell is that?
Don't ask me.
So what's up? How you doing?
Fine.
And the horse?
Since when do you care?
Wait a minute, you two know each other.
No.
Oh, yeah. Well, which is it, Kathy? Kathy. Cat.
Come on, we're wasting his time.
Oh, no, you're not wasting my time. I'm just cooling.
And you're wasting our time.
All right, I get it. Check this, though. If you need me, I'll be right over there. She won't. Yeah, we'll see about that. Oh, yeah, Cat. Words of wisdom. Drop that zero and get with the hero. Excuse me? See you later, Dick. It's Nick. Oh, yeah. Nick. What was that all about?
Forget him. I already have.
I love you, Stacey. Get up, Bo.
Did you ever take a dump made you feel like you just slept for 12 hours?
Hi, welcome back to a fresh episode of Doing It with Mike Sachs. Let's get right to it because you are doing it with me. We talk quite a bit in this episode about the process of writing and then selling a book. First with author Will Harris about his recent release, Surely You Can't Be Serious, The True Story of Airplane, which is an oral history of the movie Airplane, a movie that clearly changed the comedy scene and the comedy movies that came after. I then talked with my friend Luisa Colón about her journey, and I hate that word, but it really was a journey, to author a book, find an agent, and to then get the book published. She ended up doing it all herself, something I recommend to any writer out there struggling to find a literary agent. We get into the specifics about what worked for her, what didn't work for her, and how that might be able to help you in your quest to get a book published. But first up, I want to play something for you. I think you all know that I'm a huge fan of found audio, meaning things that I find on the radio or online or on the television set at 4:30 in the morning. What you might not know is how big a fan I am of classic rock radio. I just cannot get enough, whether it's mid-career Aerosmith or the award-winning Huey Lewis and the News or Mike and the Mechanics or the multi-Grammy nominated Foreigner. Classic rock, man, bring it on. Sort of reminds me of being younger and having more hair and riding around in my classic 86 Vet cruising for birds. Yes, I'm being facetious. I cannot stand oldies radio. But what truly interests me, and this is not a joke, are the DJs for classic rock station. How does one become a DJ for a classic rock station exactly? How bored must one be to play the same song over and over and over for 40 years? And I'm not even talking about classic rock bands who tend to have a million songs. I'm talking about the same song by the same three bands over and over and over. How many times can one listen to More Than a Feeling by Boston? Do they not have any other songs? I mean, Led Zeppelin has a ton of great songs, and all you ever hear are Stairway to Heaven or Rock and Roll or When the Levee Breaks. So I'll often wonder, who are these people who become classic rock DJs and how do they end up at this job? They obviously love music. That's why they got into radio to begin with. But who can possibly play another brick in the wall at the age of 62 during afternoon drive time, day after day, without going fucking crazy? So this brings me to what I'm about to play for you. Was listening to the classic rock station WBIG 100.3 last week. It's a station out of Washington, D.C., and I came across this fascinating DJ, someone who was apparently suffering some sort of nervous breakdown on the air. I thought at first that it was a gag, but I listened some more to his entire show, and sadly, it seemed anything but a joke. It seemed completely real. I mean, if it wasn't real, God bless, the guy never broke character, but I don't know why he would play this character. The source of this DJ's pain seemed to be that his wife was leaving him for a younger guy. Not a good thing to happen to anyone, but I wouldn't necessarily talk about it on the air, although I probably have in the past. Anyway, I'm going to play for you now some outtakes from this show, along with the music that the DJ would segue into after each talk break. Here it is.
That was Boston, More Than a Feeling. Fun fact, they say that Tom Scholz, creative force behind Boston, took anywhere from 5 to 6 months just to record one guitar lick. You want to hear another interesting fact? I hear that goddamn song one more time, might just do something I'm very much going to regret. Saw a heavenly light above the house again this morning. Was in the shape of a giant heart. This is Heart, Magic Man. Kansas, carry on wayward son. You know what happened when I rose above all the noise and confusion? More headaches. Met a young woman once who later became my wife. She had a tasty mole above her right nipple. Used to make me do all the right things for all the wrong reasons. Made me lettuce sandwiches with just the thinnest layer of heartbreak. You never tasted heartbreak so tangy. Didn't need mustard or ketchup, that you can believe. Lord almighty, I do still love her. Why did she leave? Did I have to do with the lasers that shoot out of my eyes? Uh-oh, my toes are hot. I just lit them on fire. Van Halen, hot for teacher. Okay, we know already. You're a toker, you're a joker. But are you a hero? Need a hero, listeners. A savior of sorts. After the divorce was finalized, I gave myself a little bath in the office's kitchen sink. Washed away my past. Then left accounting and, like a butterfly, molted into Jimmy Jam Johnson. The DJ is suffering a nervous breakdown. This ain't shtick, ladies and gentlemen. So now I'm just waiting for a friend. So are the Stones. Wake up, people. 66 degrees, just the slightest chance of rain. That's the money sound. Be my first caller on the Z106 hotline. You'll find yourself winning a little trip to my private lair. Speaking of which, found a dead giraffe on my lawn again. I love animals. This is House of the Rising Sun. Was that just Pink? Or was that Floyd? Whoever it was, tear down that goddamn wall already. Going on around town, it's ladies' night at Hammerjack's, popcorn trip night at Max's. Spoke to my ex during the last commercial break. Seemed that she was none too pleased that I called collect. Who's this elf standing in my palm? I like his can-do spirit. Can't move my arm to save the ball of life. Fire. Still can't. Hey, it's Buffalo Wing night at Shooter McGee's. She just bought a house in Tallahassee. It appears the grad student is moving in, and guess what? That's the Z106 party siren. My wife just sent me an invitation. You like weddings? How about white weddings? Billy Idol on Z-Rock. Fog Hat. It's 8:14 on a Monday morning, and I'm taking a slow ride to the end of my shift. Or to hell. Or to my townhome off I-95. My lady and I once made love in a back booth of an Arthur Treacher's restaurant. My lady and I once watched a sunset while doing it in an alley behind a Wawa market. We are the champions. I am a puma, all proud and powerful, scanning the Serengeti for a purpose in life. Queen! Buddy, you're a boy, make a big Hey, Jack, you really want to forget about Diane? Stay up all night playing Parcheesi alone. Works for me. Alice Cooper, no more Mr. Nice Guy. Last song of the day, folks. Y'all think I'm a nice guy? You won't after this story. Gonna show up at my ex's wedding and punch the grad student in the nose. That spray of blood will be ferocious. Yours truly, gonna be arrested. The big dog is up next to take you into the noon hour. That big dog's gonna play that rock and roll music nice and loud. So, until the morn, keep it on the upside, but don't keep it down your pants because it could bite a leper. That phrase is trademarked. Just performed a somersault in my mind. You like gymnastics? I don't. Hey, what can I say? Life's been good. You think so, Joe? Gotta disagree. Take it away, bro.
Oh, poor Jimmy Jam Johnson. I mean, first of all, who names himself Jimmy Jam Johnson? But poor guy. I mean, I might want to check back in on him in a few months just to see how he is doing with his ex-wife and her new young boyfriend. Hang in there, Jimmy Jam.
Hello, Doing It with Mike Sachs listeners. Producer Rob here, breaking in to let you know about a little podcast I put on called Vanderpump Robs. That's right, Vanderpump Robs is a prestige podcast about all things Hollywood and the reality show Vanderpump Rules. If you like comedy, if you like television, then you're going to love Vanderpump Robs. So check it out wherever you get podcasts, and if you'd like to support the show to get bonus and ad-free episodes, you can join the Vanderpump Robs Patreon at patreon.com/VanderpumpRobs. Thank you for your time.
So we have on this episode 2 interviews. The first one is with Will Harris. He's a writer, pop culture expert, someone I have known for a number of years. He's out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Someone who might be correctly referred to as a journeyman writer in the best sense of the word. Will has been freelancing for more than 20 years, maybe closer to 30 years. He's been out there hustling, working for the Onion AV Club, writing for VanityFair.com, running for a ton of other places, doing a ton of other things, which is what you have to do when you freelance. I love journeymen and journeywomen writers, if only because so few people realize just how damn hard it is being a freelance writer about pop culture, or a freelance writer about anything for that matter. It is fucking exhausting. Not only do you have to worry about pitching a piece and having a piece accepted or not accepted by editors who might not share your sensibility, you then have to write the piece, not easy, and then perhaps the most difficult aspect, you actually have to receive the money for writing the piece, which can take months, if at all. That becomes a full-time job. Now, Will only writes about things that interest him, that he genuinely loves, and there is never any snark about it, which I really appreciate. Why write about something if you don't like it? There's so much out there that's wonderful and that people should know about, that to write about something you don't like, to me, seems like a bit of a foolish exercise. Side note, this is something I actually tell writing students. Anyone can criticize. It's really easy to criticize, but I think it's much more beneficial to you as a writer to put your head down, produce the work the way you want it produced, not the way someone else wants it produced, the way you want it produced. Learn from what you don't like in others and in yourself, but don't bitch about it publicly, unless the person you're bitching about is a total fucking asshole, in which case, go for it. I mean, it seems to me to waste time writing about something you don't like, either on social media or as a long-form review or whatever. It doesn't really do anyone any good, least of all yourself. Focus on what you love, especially things not well known by others that you want to spread the word about. Okay, back to Will. So he recently came out with a book, an oral history about the making of the comedy classic Airplane. If you were not around when Airplane came out, and I was just a really young kid, but I did see this somehow in the theater. I saw everything in the theater, starting from like the age of 6. I don't know what my parents were thinking, but anyway, I did see this in the theater. It's difficult to explain just how transformative this movie was. The release date was July 2nd, 1980. And as anyone knows, the July 4th weekend for Hollywood is kind of a dump zone. They'll put all the movies that they don't know or think much about into that July 4th weekend, not really having much confidence that those movies are going to do well. So I would imagine that the execs did not quite know what they had on their hands with Airplane, as they often don't when something is brand new. But as happened back then, pre-internet, way pre-internet, word still got around really fast about this movie among the comedy nerds, which would really be about anything that came out at that time, whether it was The Jerk or reruns of Monty Python on PBS in the 80s for us in Maryland, or later Freaks and Geeks, Adam Sandler comedy albums, Mr. Show, or what have you. You just ended up finding it or hearing about it. And one thing I would love to dig into deeper, perhaps on a future episode, is how exactly did word get out pre-internet? How did we know about this? Yes, there were newspapers, but how many of us in third, fourth grade were reading newspapers? I have a theory, and this would also go for jokes that would travel around in this pre-internet era. I think it was morning zoo DJs, which were really popular back then. I think a lot of us listened to them and got a lot of our jokes and ideas and things to check out through these morning zoo DJs. It's just a theory anyway, but it could be interesting to look into. So with Airplane, it was a type of comedy that I had never seen before. No one had really seen before. You watch it today and it seems to move at a somewhat normal pace, especially for a comedy. But I can tell you that back in 1980, it seemed as if it was electric, that it was exploding with jokes, which it was. Now, this is pointed out in Will's book, but when I first saw Airplane, it reminded me of any page in an issue of Mad Magazine, including the tiny characters that you would find in the margins. Everywhere you looked, at every point in the process, you were being entertained. And I had never seen that before in a movie. Yes, there were Mel Brooks movies and other comedies, obviously. But as far as wall-to-wall jokes, I had never seen anything quite like it. Another fresh aspect of Airplane, which is also pointed out in the book, was this. You take a serious older person, man or woman, and have him or her play comedy totally straight. Have them play it like they're not even in a comedy. They're totally unaware, seemingly, of the comedy going on around them. And you can see this in Airplane with Leslie Nielsen, Lloyd Bridges, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Barbara Billingsley, the mother from Leave It to Beaver. Adam McKay has a good point. He points this out in the book that he says that this was the formula he would later use on SNL when someone older would host, someone not known for their comedy, such as Rudy Giuliani or Steve Forbes or whomever. When they would appear as hosts on the show, they would play it totally straight. There was no wink. There was no nudge to the audience. Zero. It was a firm wall to bounce the comedy off of. You let the broadness come out in playing it real. In Will's book, there's a fact that I was totally unaware of, that David Letterman actually auditioned to play the lead role, the one ultimately played by Robert Hayes. The audition did not work out, as it typically didn't when David was auditioning for roles in movies, but Letterman became a huge fan of the movie, and he said later that comedy seemed to take a turn after Airplane. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have called Airplane the Star Wars of comedy, which I love. Very accurate. And Weird Al says that I can't begin to describe the impact that Airplane had on me. It was like learning a new language. So what was this new language? Well, we'll talk about this in the interview, but I want to talk a little bit about it now. The comedic sensibility of the three writers of this movie, Jerry Zucker, Jim Abrams, and David Zucker, they're often collectively known as ZAZ or Zaz for the last names, were influenced by punk comedy out of the late 60s and early 70s in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, and later Madison. I never really thought much about this before, but the influence that Wisconsin has on modern comedy, whether it was Airplane or the other movies that Zucker, Abrams, and Zucker put out, such as Top Secret, Naked Gun, the later Scary movies, or whether it was The Onion in the 1990s into the 2000s, it changed comedy forever. LA and New York and Toronto and Chicago are typically talked about when it comes to comedy, but I've never seen a documentary on Wisconsin's influence on comedy. I am not at all familiar with the Midwest, never having even been to Wisconsin, but I'd love to know what it is about this area that produced this type of sensibility. Balls to the wall, unhinged, doesn't give a flying shit type of comedy. I suppose, too, though, that the comedy is never mean. Perhaps that has to do with the cliched niceness of the Midwesterner. I don't know, but that could also be an interesting study. And if you're out there and you have some ideas, feel free to email me. One of the influences for Zucker, Abrams, and Zucker was a tiny little movie out of New York City called The Groove Tube, which came out in 1974, which has an interesting history on its own. It starred, if you can even say starred, among other actors Richard Belzer and Chevy Chase. The following info comes from the web, and the reason I'm quoting it is because I was going to rewrite it, but it's good enough just to read as is. Quote, the low-budget movie satirizes television and the counterculture of the early 1970s. The film was derived from sketches shot on videotape and shown at the Channel One Theater on East 60th Street in New York, a venue that featured R-rated video recordings shown on 3 television sets, which was a novelty to the audiences of the time. Compilations of sketches from these presentations were taken on tour to college venues, and based on audience responses, the best received sketches were restaged on film, with most of the original actors reprising their roles. The news desk satire, including the signature line, "Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow," was later used by Chevy Chase for his signature weekend update piece on Saturday Night Live. I like that detail about honing jokes on stage before shooting a movie, which is something that the Marx Brothers did on stage before they would ever produce one of their movie scripts. So Zaz saw this very underground film and thought, we can do that. And that to me is a magical line. We can do that. There's nothing stopping us. We don't need permission. We don't need to borrow a ton of money. We don't need to move to Hollywood. We can do this. And they could do it, and they did. 3 years later, in 1977, the three put out the Kentucky Fried Movie, a low-budget collection of shorts that were mostly parodies of the movies that you would find running overnight on cable. This was another film that Letterman auditioned for, the Kentucky Fried Movie, and he didn't make, which just goes to show either just how arbitrary making it in the acting industry actually is, or just how little David Letterman gave a shit about getting any of these roles. The director of Kentucky Fried Movie, John Landis, was later famous for Animal House, Blues Brothers, Trading Places, Spies Like Us, Coming to America, and a ton of other projects, and one very, very, very unfortunate accident on a movie set. If you watch Kentucky Fried Movie today, yes, it's a bit dated, but you'll also see that it was a slice of total anarchy, which you can recognize in Airplane, a movie that came out 3 years later, although I would say that was more controlled anarchy, like a controlled crash. A ton of work went into the Airplane script, and it was honed down to what we see now. What's interesting is that what you see in the movie, the characters, actual characters that the audience cares about, which is one of the first rules of comedy. In any comedy, I don't care if it's Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin, Will Ferrell movies, whatever, you have to care about the characters. If you don't, the comedy will not work. The jokes may fade in movies about solid characters, but if you like them, the comedy tends to last. Is there a lesson in all this for young comedy writers? I think there is. And it's what I've been always saying. Do what you want, how you want, make the characters likable, and put it out there. You have to think, I can do that. And then you do it. Do not swirl around the drain for decades. Just get it done and move on. Here is my interview with Will Harris.
Let's talk about, Will, how this project came about.
Yeah, it started with the oral history I did for the AV Club of Airplane in 2015. Which itself came about just because they were doing a screening of the film in, I think, Nashville for a film festival. And Sean O'Neill reached out and said, would you be interested in taking a shot at an oral history? I'm like, absolutely. So I reached out and talked to David Zucker and Jim Abrams and Jerry Zucker, all three of them for this, and as many of the cast and crew as I could get. And it was obviously a huge success, went viral and all that. But then maybe a year and a half later, December 2016, I get an email from David Zucker with the subject line of freelance work. And it just said, I might have some for you. Give me a call. And then we got on the phone and he said, we have been talking for years about trying to maybe do a book. And none of us have gotten off our ass to do anything about it. And then one weekend we were watching a Packers game and he said, I don't even remember who brought it up, but somebody said, well, that thing for the AV Club, that didn't suck. Maybe we could get that guy. So they reached out to me, and the rest is a very long history that it obviously took until this year to finally come out.
You mentioned Sean before. He was an editor at the AV Club, correct?
Yes, correct. Yes.
All right. So you reached out. Now, I've done oral histories in the past. Sometimes when you reach out to people for oral histories, you end up getting everyone but the main characters, whether it's the director or the main actor or whomever. Was there any problem reaching out to these people, be it Zaz or the actors?
For the original oral history, I could not get Julie Haggerty to save my life. I don't know if I was reaching out to somebody who wasn't actually representing her anymore. I just thought that's who it was or what, but I could not get any response. And then when I finally got her for the book, she's like, I have no idea what the problem was. I would have been happy to talk to you. So yeah. She was the big unintentional holdout, I guess you'd say.
It's interesting. That's happened to me too. I'll contact someone and finally get in touch. Usually it's someone higher up, or the producer or the director reaching out to them themselves and them saying, I was never given this information from my PR person.
Yeah.
But once she was interested, it seemed like she was a major part of the book, that she gave you a ton of information.
Oh, for sure. I mean, once they were actually doing the book, David himself reached out to her and said, this is what we're doing. Would you mind being a part of it? And she was happy to do it.
She's so wonderful in that movie. And as you point out, this was, if not her first role, one of her first major roles. And they knew instantly when she came in that she was going to be a perfect fit.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, she wasn't the only person they saw for the role, but she was the one who, when she came in, they knew she was it.
Now, what did it have to do with being lazy, as you say, or that's the word that they used? Was that what it came down to? Because I'm surprised this had not been done previously. There's been an oral history seemingly on every important movie out there. And when it comes to comedy movies, as has been pointed out, this is the Star Wars of comedy movies. Why had this not been done previously?
I honestly, I don't know, except probably a combination of, as David said, they just never got around to doing it, with probably a little bit also of, if they were going to do it, they wanted to do it on their own terms, which ultimately they did. But trying to do it on their own terms would have been a hard sell if they hadn't done it completely on their own. I mean, the whole process of the book, we're done with it before they ever got signed to a publisher.
That says so much about their creativity and their mindset, that they wanted to do it that on their own terms.
Yes, which says, once you read the book, you'll see that's pretty much how they had to make Airplane too.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the thing that stuck out for me, and it's just pointed out in the book. It's a very punk movie that only they could have made it in the way they wanted. And there were other factors that producers wanted them to consider. For instance, Pete Rose was supposed to be possibly one of the co-pilots, and also who's the actor? Barry Manilow.
Oh God, yes.
Was supposed to be in the movie, which to me is astonishing to think about. But when you think back to that time, he was quite popular. He had the soundtrack to Foul Play and other things, but he is not a good fit for that movie.
No. Of course, and there's even the more famous person who auditioned for it, for the role of Ted Stryker, who did not get it, which is David Letterman.
I had never heard that. I'm a huge Letterman fan. Had not read that in any book, including a somewhat recent Letterman memoir. What's interesting about Letterman, he and a lot of those comedians who were around at that time seemed to be up for a lot of things that we have no idea about. Who sent him to do this? And what was their purpose? They wanted him to become a leading man?
Well, he had an agent at the time who, I can never remember what actually makes into the book and what doesn't, but he certainly said to me that he had an agent at the time who believed in the Freddie Prinze road to success, which is that you did a stint on the Tonight Show, you became hugely popular, and they signed you to a sitcom deal. So she would send him out to do all these various auditions. And I know there's a great story in the book about, he auditioned for a sitcom that I'm pretty sure ultimately became Making It, starring David Naughton, because he refers to it as the Saturday Night Live or Saturday Night Fever sitcom. But he went and they said, we want you to stand in front of a mirror and getting ready for a Saturday night out in the town. And you start kind of dancing in front of the mirror. And he said, you know what? I've just remembered I've left my truck running. I'll be right back. And then I went outside and never came back.
Who can blame him? I mean,
exactly.
This stud from Ball State is preening before a mirror like John Travolta would. It's just amazing when you think back at And this still goes on today. I mean, I think that there is a disconnect between what a creative, whether it's an actor or a writer or whomever, is capable of and what they want and what their management or agent wants of them.
Well, in the case of Airplane, to be fair, it was actually ZAZ who wanted him to audition because they'd seen him at the Comedy Store, and they thought that it was going to be a good fit because he had such good comic timing and everything. But then he didn't want to do it anyway. He said, look, it's going to be terrible. I'm going to be terrible. I'm not an actor. I'm going to ruin your movie. And they're like, oh, come on down, do the audition. It'll be fun. So he came down, he did the audition. And as soon as he was done, they said, you were right. You can't act.
I think it was actually a good thing because I'm friendly with Adam Resnick. And he's talked about this where Letterman was in Cabin Boy.
Yes.
One of, if not the only movie he's ever acted in. And he made such a point about degrading not only himself, but possibly by friendly fire, the movie itself, that Adam felt that the movie suffered for it. So perhaps the fact that Letterman did not get into Airplane was a positive thing for the filmmakers.
Oh, I dare say. And he has said himself, as he said in the book, I believe, that, it was to everybody's benefit that he wasn't in it because he loves the movie and his son loves the movie and he still quotes it to this day. And he just knows that he would have ruined it if he'd been in it.
Explain to me Mrs. Zubatsky's Law.
Oh my God. That is so much in their corner that I can't even do it justice, really.
Okay. Well, let me explain it from my standpoint. Having read it, it meant a lot to me because it sort of goes back to the punk aesthetic, the garage band aesthetic. Mrs. Zubatsky was a neighbor of theirs in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and there was a fire at their place, I think, at the house where they lived.
I believe so.
Fire engines arrived, and they didn't know what to do. They were struggling. Should we unload the ladder? Should we do this, do that? Mrs. Zubatsky was a neighbor, peeked out of her own house, was on a balcony, and basically direct them to do what they needed to do. And for them, it was a good lesson in Hollywood, where in the end, it comes down to what you have to do, and you have to do it your own way.
Yeah.
And there's even a photograph of Mrs. Zubatsky. I'm not sure if it was taken on that day, but she's on the balcony pointing, giving directions, seemingly to the firemen.
Yeah, and I should say they did talk about it during the course of the conversation, but they put it into more specific detail when they actually put together the book.
All right. So what was your role and what was their role? I mean, you just mentioned Mrs. Zubatsky was something they inserted. So why did they bring you on board?
Well, I did probably over 24 Zoom interviews with all three of them on the phone at the same time. So I think a lot of my job in this case was helping to lubricate their memories. I did all the transcriptions of all those conversations. And I tried to put them in some semblance of chronological order when I submitted it to them. And then, of course, I did the interviews with the cast and crew and the fans of the film who've gone on to bigger success. And from there, they took it and rearranged it to their discretion. I mean, like I said, it was predominantly chronological when I did it, and it stays semi-chronological most of the time. And then we're looking at their own thoughts on print, they were able to expand all of it here and there too.
Was it their philosophy that it would not be negative against anyone or anything? Because it's a very positive book.
For the most part, yeah. Because I think that their belief was that it was all these people that helped them get this film made, and they didn't really want to do anything that would thoroughly disparage anyone.
All right. So quite a few of the people that you interviewed Adam McKay and all these other great people who are fans of the movie, they all came to the conclusion that this was something new. Adam McKay says that they actually cracked the code. Can you talk about that? What they did that was different than what had preceded it in comedy?
Well, it kind of stretches back to the very beginning of it when they were doing the Kentucky Fried Theater. And to get ideas for sketches, they would turn on the VCR they had, which was basically new technology at that point, because that was still the 70s. And they would just record it, let it run overnight, and see whatever they got. They would watch the next day to see, mine it for comedy. And one of the things that they got was the movie 0 Hour from the 50s, which was basically a grade B action film or thriller where a plane is in distress. And they effectively took the entire plot, 0 Hour, and put it into Airplane to the point where they actually had to get the rights to use the film. Otherwise, it would have been outright plagiarism. That's how much of it they used. But then they ended up spending like 5 years honing the script, getting it exactly how they wanted it. I think that's part of what Adam McKay was talking about, because the Code was doing it over and over and over again and getting it just right to their satisfaction, going through various different phases of editing, and they teamed up with the guy named Tom Perry at Paramount, who helped them really develop the screenplay more, because they, of course, had never written a screenplay, not in any real sense. The Kentucky Fried Movie was basically a sketch movie, effectively. This was a real proper movie. And with Tom Perry's help, they were able to make it and turn it into an actual movie script.
All right. So 2 things you just mentioned stand out. One is that they had to get everything just right. Explain that in the sense that, they didn't want it to be too goofy. You need to play off stability in order for something to work.
Yeah, they have made a point of saying that when it comes to their comedy, they got to know what is the biggest joke and where to stop with it. Like in particular, the stuff with Lloyd Bridges and looks like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking. They knew that they could use that joke a couple of times, but they were never going to get any better than the looks like I quit the wrong week to quit sniffing glue. They worked out the comedy of threes. I think that was actually the third one. So, I mean, they knew exactly how far to take the joke, when to stop it. And they would go through, in fact, one time they did a screening of the film, and they cut the film and its jokes based solely on one guy laughing, because they would record the audio in the theater and they would listen to it. Nobody else was really laughing, but this one guy who would laugh at all the jokes that he thought was funny. And his sense of humor was so close to theirs that they were able to tell, at least in their mind, what worked and what didn't work. And if he didn't laugh, they would cut the joke.
All right.
And,
do you remember the specific jokes that he laughed at that no one else laughed at?
I do not remember specifically. I just know that there was a lot of silence surrounding his laughing. That's why he stood out so much on the audio. That's why they used him in particular as the tracking guide.
Which is really the opposite of most audience reaction forms, where the majority of the people have to like it. And even if one person with a great sense of humor laughs, it's not going to make it into the movie.
It's true. Well, in this case, as far as another thing about the aspect of cracking the code, they did something very unique at the time, which is that they had serious actors doing comedy by not being funny, which is you'd have to work that out on a blackboard to really make that understand that properly. It's so weird.
That's right. And Adam McKay says that's what they actually ended up doing on SNL, when a Giuliani or anyone serious who would be on the show would not act goofy. They would act straight. I mean, this is the reason why when Frank Zappa appeared on the show SNL, it was such a disaster, because he was mugging for the camera and he was acting as a clown. But Adam McKay's point was, when these people come on the show, you have to almost act as if they don't even know they're doing comedy.
Yeah. Which is, they were very fortunate on Airplane in that Leslie Nielsen, who wasn't even their first pick for that part of the Doctor, he instantly got the feel of the film and nailed exactly what they wanted him to do, as opposed to, say, Lloyd Bridges, who was took the longest of the older actors to really get the feel for what they were asking of him. It finally got to the point where I think it was Robert Stack who just said, Lloyd, they just want us to be us.
There's a part in the book that I found fascinating, that how precise the comedy has to be for this to work. And there's a specific example of the cockpit scene when the pilot is asking the child if he's ever seen a grown man naked. The direction for Peter Graves was, this is quote, look left, look down, grab the wheel, look away, say the line, which was, have you ever seen a grown man naked? Put your arm around the kid. And there was no leeway. That had to work exactly like that. It had to be as precise as that, or it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're, as you say, they're very specific as far as what makes their comedy funny. And
they have a set of rules. Did you work on this list, or did that come straight from them? There are 15 rules. It's called the Zaz 15 Rules.
That came straight from them. That was actually in existence long before we ever started the book. I think it ran in, I can't remember if it was Vulture or Entertainment Weekly, but it ran somewhere else prior to this.
I love this, and I'm just going to read one or two. Joke on a joke. Number one, two jokes at the same time cancel each other out. Breaking the frame, which is number 4. Don't remind the audience they're watching a movie. Jokes about the movie itself, the movie business, or comedy itself are a strict no-no, although it is possible to sneak one in if you don't dwell on it. Number 6, Jerry Lewis, a comedian who is doing every possible crazy thing he can to get a laugh. As a result, when something was over the top, we would just say Jerry Lewis. So that goes back to the precision where the jokes are wild, but you can't go too over the top with them. And one example would be the instrument joke in the cockpit. They're operating on instruments, and you cut over to them, and they're all playing musical instruments. But it was a very quick cut. It did come back, and that was that.
Well, I think they would argue, or I would argue, and I think they would agree, that if there's any exception to that rule in the film, it's Steven Stucker. I mean, he's definitely playing to the beat of his own drummer, and they knew it because he's the only person in the film they didn't really write for because nobody could write for him.
Right. So this was the air traffic controller who was a bit like Paul Lynn or J.M.J. Bullock. I remember seeing it at the time and loving it. I saw it about 10 years ago. I thought, this could be a little bit on the edge here. But what I found fascinating in your book was he was playing himself. He wasn't playing a mincing, limp-wristed character for laughs. This was who he was. And he was such a character that because of that, the character rang true.
That chapter in the book is probably my favorite. Just all the stuff that they had to say about him and how they first encountered him when he showed up at the Kentucky Fried Theater. And he was a true character in the truest sense of that word. Very complicated, and it's a shame that he passed away as young as he did.
Well, talk about him a little bit. I want the listeners to know about this guy. He was an incredible talent, and he blazed bright. Unfortunately, he died young of AIDS.
A very flamboyant guy. I mean, flamboyant really is the accurate word. It's not even just the cliche term. It legitimately describes who he was as a person. I know he showed up at the theater and was, I think, pulled up in a pink Cadillac, maybe it was, and just dressed to the nines in what would become typical Stucker attire, and just basically was ready to go, and they didn't even know who he was.
Well, that goes back to what you said previously. There were two things we dealt with. The first one. The second thing that you dealt on quickly that I want to delve into deeper is that you really do have to like these characters, that there has to be at least one character that you completely associate with, and you want these characters to do well, to land, and to find themselves in a relationship. Because if that isn't the case, then the comedy doesn't land as well.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I think most of the people in the film, as you say, are likable. I mean, certainly Ted Stryker is one, and Elaine, you're sympathetic to her because you feel that she's been wronged by Ted at some point in the past. Ted, just obviously, he was affected by the war, and a lot of that stuff they take the structure of that from Zero Hour, and that certainly I think helps make them into more real characters. Otherwise, it would be just straight joke. It's through the help of Tom Perry from Paramount that they were actually made these characters more relatable and more real.
You've mentioned it, but I don't know if the listeners know about it. Explain Groove Tube and explain Kentucky Fried Theater and explain why those are so important to the comedy scene for those who were coming up at the time.
Well, Kentucky Fried Theater was a thing that started actually in Wisconsin with Zucker Abrams Zucker, and Dick Chudnow was their other partner. And it just became the talk of the town, getting so big as far as attendance that they decided, well, we're going to try to move this thing to Los Angeles, which they proceeded to do. And it took a little bit of time to get off the ground. But once it did, it again became the talk of the town in Los Angeles as well. And people would just go see these live shows. And it was definitely just really unique comedic mindset at the time, to the point where its success led them to try to do a movie. Now, as far as the film goes, it certainly is not the best thing they've ever done. It clearly is going to be Airplane. But they were able to actually get it done with the help of John Landis. But at the same time, it's a lot more control by him and for the end cut of the film. That was something that really frustrated them and led them to do Airplane solely on their own terms, or at least as much as they could within a studio system like that.
Right. And the great thing was, I mean, long before digital, obviously, when it was difficult to make a film, they made a film where a lot of people watched it and thought, I can do that. It's possible to do on my own.
Yes, definitely in the case of Kentucky Fried Movie. It felt like a movie, but it definitely felt like something that you could have done in your garage or in your backyard.
Is it true that one of the original lines was not, have you ever seen a grown man naked, but have you ever sucked a grown man's cock?
Yeah, I believe it was. And then I can't remember if it was Jim or if it was Jerry, but one of them said, no, this is just going to take it a step too far. We can't do that.
Well, you point out in the book, which I think should be pointed out more often, the comedy that comes from Wisconsin or has come from Wisconsin, whether it's Zaz or whether it's The Onion, has made a great difference in how comedy has changed over the years. But it's not something you really hear about. One hears about New York, LA, Chicago, and Toronto, but not necessarily Wisconsin. Can you go into a little bit why Wisconsin might be a hotbed or was a hotbed of producing such amazing comedic talent?
I think it was very family based, but also they were absorbing a lot of popular culture through films and through TV because there wasn't necessarily but so much to do. And that helped expand their comedic horizons by being able to do parodies of these things that they had absorbed watching on television and theaters.
Let's talk about you. I'm a big fan of your writing. I mean, it is hard out there for everyone, but the fact that you're writing what you want to write, things that interest you, I find fantastic.
It's been a long fight. I mean, I got my degree in journalism in 92, and it actually took until 2006 before I finally had a full-time job in journalism. I was doing freelancing all along in various pop culture, like alt weeklies in the Virginia Beach area. And then eventually, finally, once I always say the internet made my career, which it really did. I got a job with bullseye.com and wrote for them as a senior editor writer from 2006 to 2011. And I was basically had carte blanche to interview whoever I wanted in music, TV, film. If I could get them, then they were happy to run it. And then 2011, kind of the bottom fell out of the ad market for websites. And so I had to go full-time freelance. And that definitely was a struggle, but I was able, thanks to Noel Murray giving me an in to the AV Club and Keith Phipps accepting the in, that I was able to start doing interviews for them. And once I latched onto the random roles feature, that definitely, if it didn't make my career, it certainly cemented it for sure. I spent a dozen years writing for places like the AV Club predominantly for the longest time, but Decider, did some stuff for Vulture, EW, Vanity Fair, Variety. You know, it's a hard market out there and you just got to go out there and sell yourself. And that's what I had to do for a dozen years.
What advice would you give to those who are out there listening, who don't want to get into comedy writing per se, but who might want to write about comedy?
Don't be afraid to pitch, and don't be afraid to keep pitching. I mean, you're going to get some no's out there given the current climate, but definitely if you keep pitching, you can find work. The biggest key is to, when you find that work, be sure that you're going to get paid for it. Because lots of people will say, well, we can give you an opportunity to do this and you get lots of exposure. But my mortgage company does not take exposure, and I don't think yours probably will either.
It's a hustle, man.
100%. And an exhausting one, and one that there have been many times where I wanted to give up. Or I had to supplement my income with either selling on eBay or selling plasma even at a certain point. Just because I could, and it was relatively lucrative for a short period. But I mean, you got to do what you got to do. As long as you keep at it and keep pitching, then eventually you can make the funds.
Well, I think that's really something that they don't teach in school, journalism or creative writing, is that, and the problem too is a lot of these teachers who are teaching and haven't been out there hustling themselves. But sometimes the key to success is just sticking with it.
It is. And I think also it's key to remember that there are a lot of editors out there who have never had to hustle like that either. So you will send out pitches to editors who you will never hear back from. And you can tell usually the people who respond to you are the ones who have been freelancers and who have been in the trenches, and they know what it's like. So even if they have to tell you no, that's what you do.
Right. Anything you want to add about the book that we didn't get into?
Just that I could not be happier how it turned out. If I get anyone to work with in the future who's even half as good, I'll feel like I've been blessed.
The book is called Surely You Can't Be Serious, by our friend Will Harris, David Zucker, Jim Abrams, and Jerry Zucker, otherwise known as Zaz. This is out from St. Martin's Press. Terrific book. Great job, Will. We love what you do. Please keep it up.
Absolutely.
Up next is my second interview, and this is with a friend of mine, Luisa Colón. Luisa is a New York City writer and artist, just an all-around creative person who tried for many years to get a book published. It finally happened, and it is more than well-deserved. The book is called Bad Moon Rising, and it's just out from Cemetery Dance Publications, a publisher out of my home state of Maryland. I wanted to know what the process was like for Luisa attempting to get this book published, her first book, and what she would suggest to others now wanting to get a book of fiction published, or any genre for that matter. Does one need an agent in the end? How does one pitch? What is needed? What should one not do? Would she have any recommendations for anyone out there who would love to have a first book published? Here is our conversation.
The journey you had to go through was not easy.
No, not easy. My novel Bad Moon Rising came out in August 2023, published by Cemetery Dance Publications, after a very long and harrowing journey.
Well, let's talk about that, because I was involved in the sense that I would hear about the frustrations that you went through. So
Yeah.
you wrote a book, and
Right.
it was complete, right? And you were submitting this to agents as a complete product.
Yeah. So 8 long years ago, I wrote this manuscript and I started submitting it to agents. I had my query tracker and I was, had the checklist and all that stuff. And I submitted it to about 100 agents.
When you say you submit, you submitted what exactly to each of these agents?
So I submitted a query, and in some cases the manuscript, different forms of queries. So some queries were just like, can I show you the manuscript? Some of them I got responses to, so I sent half or the whole manuscript, but I reached out to over 100 agents.
That's incredible. And you got these names where?
I got them from Query Tracker, and also just, Googling, looking at people's wish lists online, agents' wish lists, interviews, that kind of thing.
100 agents. And you heard back from about how many?
I mean, I would say I got, semi-positive / curious responses maybe from 30. And that would be just like, can I see the manuscript? Or can I see the first chapter or something like that?
Okay, so from those 30, once you sent out a sample of the book, how many did you then hear from?
So none of them signed me. Some of them didn't ever respond. And some of them wrote back and said, variations of, I enjoyed your work. It's not right for me. I feel like this is one of the biggest form things is I don't feel I'm the one who could champion your work the way it deserves. But basically rejections.
Okay, now did that have to do with, you think, the genre of it? Can you explain what the book is and what it's about?
Yeah, no, I wrote the book about, I thought I was just writing about family dynamics, divorce, broken families, sibling rivalry. It did have violence in it, but for me, it was kind of like, well, I'm just sort of talking about how this stuff feels, and I'm using sort of literal things that happen to the characters to describe how these things could feel to people. And I really didn't think it was that violent or upsetting, but pretty much every single person who rejected it said it was just too disturbing for them, which is interesting because there's a book called White Oleander. I don't know if you've ever read it, by Janet Fitch, where tons of terrible things happen in the book. Terrible. I don't know that my book has as much terrible stuff as happens, but somehow that book just got like rubber stamped, like literary fiction. And I don't know if it's like the Latina / Brooklyn element, but people were like, no way would we ever publish this, ever.
I mean, what did they think? You were going to talk about Santeria or something?
I mean, maybe a heartwarming story about a Puerto Rican girl growing up in Brooklyn.
Do you think that had an effect on these agents? in that it wasn't something they were familiar with.
Yeah, it did not fit. I feel secure in saying it did not fit their idea of what a book like that should be, whether it's a thriller or a family or coming of age, whatever. It didn't fit in any of those pegs for them, or however you want to put it. None of those puzzle pieces fit, and so therefore it wouldn't work.
All right, so obviously not a position any writer wants to find himself or herself in. How did you react to their reaction?
I mean, it was a super bummer for many years. And when I finally did sign with agents, they started changing or asking me to change little things. So in a case-by-case basis, I kind of had to be like, well, all right, they want me to change this one huge thing. There was one huge thing where two characters in the book who should not have been having sex had sex. And it was like, deal breaker, we will not sign with you if this occurs in the book. And that one I had to be like, well, is that really the hill I want to die on? Like, it had been said before, it seemed like it made people really uncomfortable. I had to find my way of, is that a deal breaker for me? Okay, it's not, I'm going to take it out. So I took it out and I signed with the two agents. And then there were like some other little things that kept coming up. Oh, could you just change this? Could you take this out? We think it's more young adulty, so could you take this out? Could you take that out? And I was kind of like, had to choose my battles there. And then finally it came down to the ending, like, well, we also would like for you to have a happy ending, because they were sending it out to publishers who were saying, it's too dark, there's no hope. There really was someone who wrote back, there's no hope, no lightness, just darkness. And they wanted it to not be like that. And that was where we sort of bandied back and forth for a while, because I liked the ending I had. I didn't even think it was an unhappy ending, actually. It felt true to the story. It had never changed in all the iterations of my many drafts. That ending was always the same. And they wanted me to make it happy. So that was a big turning point for me. I had to decide.
Well, how much tweaking of the book did you end up doing? I mean, when they say they want changes, this is not a 1 or 2 page edit. This is usually a months long process.
It's a lot. I mean, some of it they had suggested switching some of the chapters around just so it started with one thing instead of another. And then they had asked me to cut out some stuff, which was hard for me to do because, as you know, like, you work on something so hard, every word feels really precious. It's like, what? They don't want this? This is gold, all of it. But I had to, in some ways, like, it didn't work out because a lot of criticisms I've gotten about the book are like, oh, but we wanted to know what happened to such and such, and that got cut out. So yeah, there were a lot of iterations.
Yeah, I think this is very common. I've been through this, and I know a lot of other authors who have. You finally get an agent interested in your work, but they want to make a few changes. And before you know it, a year has passed, and you have a product you're not happy with. And from what I've experienced, that product doesn't end up selling anyway. So why go through that year process of making something that you're not happy with, that you didn't want to make from the get-go?
Yeah, and if it does do well, I don't know how. I mean, I'm not sure how that would feel. Would my next thing, would I have to produce something like that, which wasn't really true to my vision anyway? So is it just perpetuating fake kind of thing? I don't know. It did not feel good.
Okay, so you came to a decision. You were either going to abide by their suggestions or you weren't. And what was your decision?
So I decided I was not going to go by their suggestions. So what I did was I went back and did a major rewrite of it, and it ended up being darker. And although I kept the one big sex thing that everyone was freaking out about, I kept that out. I put a lot of stuff back in, and I just kind of leaned into it being dark because it felt so right. And I was ecstatic when I finished. I kind of felt like they're going to see this is right. This is the right way to go, because it felt so right to me. It came together and I was like, this is it. And I know it's not what they think they wanted, but it's so right. They're going to get it.
Okay. So that's, to me, the most important thing. That's why people get into writing, to write things that they want to write, how they want to write it. And it feels like it's the right thing to do it, because the fact you felt ecstatic after doing it the way you wanted to, I think is a good lesson. And that I think most writers should do that. Now, if there are small changes, I mean, everyone's edited, but if you're going to change major things and the author isn't happy about it, that's not an agent you want to work with.
Yeah. Although in my case, it felt like it's this agent or no agent, which was actually true. But at the time that felt like it could be insurmountable.
So did you have an agent when you sold this book?
I did not.
Right. So one doesn't need an agent. And you felt ecstatic with this new version. Where did you then proceed? How did you take this new book that you were happy with into the realm of getting it published?
So I first sent it to my agents. Like I said, I felt like they would just get it because it felt so right. I mean, I felt like I was dancing with this version in perfect step. I really was ecstatic. So they scheduled a meeting, like a phone meeting that I didn't have a good feeling about, because it was just like, let's talk about it on Tuesday without any, And I was like, any thoughts you want to share with me before then? No, let's just talk on Tuesday. Okay. Well, that's like the equivalent of, the boyfriend saying like, we need to talk. It's not good. Yeah. So then it also happened when I called them, I had no idea that a tragedy had taken place in the nation. Something had happened that day that I called them that I wasn't aware of yet. I was working at home. I didn't have the news on. They knew it. I didn't know it. We got on the phone and I was like, what's up, girlfriends? I can't wait to talk about the new version of my manuscript. And they were like, well, this is a terrible world. It's a terrible, terrible place for our children to grow up in. We don't want to be responsible for putting more like badness.
They were just using that as an excuse to back up what they were going to tell you already.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, looking back, the fact that I was like, hey, girls, what's up is a little unfortunate. It doesn't feel good as a memory, but I honestly had no idea what was going on.
What was going on that day?
There was a school shooting. It was
terrible. But what does that have to do with Bad Moon Rising?
I mean, the way I think you're right that was going to happen anyway, but the way they put it is the world is a dark place and we don't want to be responsible for putting more darkness out into the world.
All right. So they're a no-go. So now you must be feeling like I'm totally free floating in space on my own here. What do I do? How do I do this? And then you made it happen, which is impressive to me.
Thank you. Well, I sulked for like a day or two and felt sorry for myself. And then I just kind of like came back into action. And I really had like, a fuck the world attitude about it. And I started querying publishers myself. And I actually had, at that point, had the greatest pitch in the whole world, which was to pitch it to horror imprints and say, my agents just fired me because they said my book is too scary and dark. Would you like to take a look at it? And I had 100% rate of people like, yes. I want to look at it. Like it was just immediate. No one said no. There wasn't a single publisher who was like, I'm really busy. Our plate's full. They were all like, yeah, we want to see it.
All right. So you reached out. How many publishers did you reach out to?
I would say I reached out to maybe a little less than a dozen publishers. That was to start. I had a new spreadsheet going and I pretty much instantly connected with Kevin Lucia at Cemetery Dance Publications. And there were maybe 3 other publishers who were reading it and like, we're really interested and we want to run it by our team. But Kevin Lucia read it and he loved it and said, I want to work with you. And I just felt completely like it was perfect. It just felt like kismet. So, I accepted and I wrote to the I think it was about 3 other publishers who were thinking about it. And I said, actually, I think I found my home. So I'm going to go with Kevin at Cemetery Dance.
Did you work with anyone to go over the contract on your end before signing?
No, really. I was so thrilled. I think, honestly, even if it had said like I had to, give a pinky finger in order for the contract to go through. I mean, I don't use either of my pinkies that much. So I would have said yes.
Yeah.
No, everything was in order. It was pretty straightforward. I didn't feel like he was taking anything away from me at all. I kept the kind of rights that I wanted to hold on to. And I asked him a couple of questions and he was great about it. So no, I didn't really have any help with it.
So how's he, well, let's talk first. Cemetery Dance is a publication. It used to be a magazine. I think it still is occasionally. And also a book publishing arm out of Maryland, my home state. And Stephen King is very close with the owner. He's co-written a few books and has supported him greatly. So how has the experience been for you now that you made this book happen? It came out in August, just 2 months later. How has the experience been?
I'm really, really, really happy. And I'm happy in a way that feels like, honest to God, Luisa happy, which is I feel like people are reading it and I'm getting good feedback and it's came out the way I wanted it to. And I started working on the next thing. So for me, that was kind of, I don't know if I ever envisioned like, any type of John Grisham level success with it. It was more like I had this book that I desperately wanted to write and have seen, and it feels amazing and getting good feedback and connecting. That's really exciting, is that I'm connecting with all these great horror people and getting to talk about books and movies in a way that I haven't before, and like that people actually find interesting and not intolerable. And I just submitted my second manuscript, so it all feels very right.
See, I love this, and this is what I suggest for authors, whether they're young or in the mid-career or just struggling, is just put it out. Find a way to put it out and then move on. I know so many writers who I won't talk to for a few years. I'll come back. They're still trying to pitch the same book idea. And I found that if you do that, you can circle the drain, and before you know it, 10 years has passed. When you produce something that's tangible and you have it out there and you can move on, good things tend to happen. A lot of people can't imagine what you're imagining, and that's fine. But to hand them a book and say, this is what I wanted to do, and I think it's an important step. And from that, good things happen, whether it's an audiobook, whether it's another book that you can work on with that publisher, whether it's TV rights. You just need something to hand to them rather than just saying, I'm still working on the idea. So the fact that you did what you did, I think, was a very important thing and a very good lesson for any writer, no matter what point in his or her career.
Yeah, and I mean, despite the fact that I sound probably very girlish and immature, I am of the ripe old age of 48. So I started writing this book when I was 40.
There's no, I mean, that's what I tell people too. Like, all right, you're 48 and you thought, I'm too old to do this. I'm not going to do it. I mean, how old would you be in 7 years if you did? You'd still be 55. So why not have a book or two under your name?
Yeah, the time's going to pass anyway.
Exactly. So put it out. It doesn't matter. And the fact now is you can do things as an author you've never been able to do ever before. You can put out books by yourself. You can design it. You can write it. You can edit it. You can market it. You don't need the permission from agents. You don't need the permission even from publishers, although in your case, it worked out.
Yeah, but that's absolutely true.
You have to do it and you have to push forward. And the fact that you did it, I just think it's a great story. And that's really why I wanted to talk about this and congratulate. I haven't talked to you since the book came out. I love the book and I love that you did this. So,
and you were such a strong, oh my God, you were such a strong support system over the past bunch of years.
Well, I just hate when people are sort of bullied into thinking they can't do something. There's no reason why you can't. You don't have to be from Harvard. You don't have to live in New York City, although you do. You don't have to know the right people. You can just do it. Fucking do it. I mean, I grew up in DC, and I was a big fan of punk, the punk aesthetic with Minor Threat, Fugazi, Discord Records. And I mention this all the time, but I mean, they just did it. They didn't ask for permission. And by doing it, they created a fan base and they created their own movement. So I think anyone now can do that. And I eagerly suggest to the audience to go out and buy this book to support my friend and to support Cemetery Dance, which I think is a great operation. So congratulations, and
thank you so much for
celebratory
everything.
drink on me. Let's meet up soon.
Please, let's do it soon.
That's it for this episode of Doing It with Mike Sachs. I'd like to thank you for listening. I sincerely appreciate it. I'd like to thank Sonar for giving me this opportunity, and I'd like to thank the following for helping to make this episode possible. Rob Schulte, the world's greatest producer, and that ain't no lie. Will Harris, whose new book, Surely You Can't Be Serious, The True Story of Airplane, is out now from St. Martin's Press. Luisa Colón, my pal, whose new book, Bad Moon Rising, is out now from Cemetery Dance Publications. Buy it, it's great. I loved it. Support writers who bust their asses to publish books and support small publishing houses.
I'd like to thank Dax Jordan for playing the classic rock DJ.
Until next week, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for my junk, Jack.
People, there is no UFO landing.
Harriet Frankovich thinks there is.
Nobody sees the world the way Harriet does.
What color was I when I was born?
You were kind of red. You were throwing a tantrum.
Well, maybe I didn't want to come out because I knew you were already here.
Until she discovers a friend.
You have California plates. You from Disneyland?
My mom says I'm from a place where I'm the smartest person there.
Ready to share an adventure.
What are we waiting for?
For someone to rescue me.
I want them to rescue me too.
Stay away from the highway.
We will.
We will.
But while they're facing their fears,
Don't look down! Don't look down! Whoa! Are you stuck?
I'm stuck.
her sister's getting worried.
Promise me you won't hang around Ricky anymore.
Mom, you're driving on the wrong side of the road again.
Buckle up.
And her mother doesn't get it.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Do you think I was switched with another baby at the hospital? Just hoping.
Moonstone Entertainment presents
My mom is afraid of me being alone when she dies. I don't want to go to a home.
two extraordinary friends
Sometimes great ideas came to me all at once.
trying to escape
Ricky, I'm flying!
You're not going anywhere. You're still on the rock.
a world that didn't understand them.
You're supposed to kiss me.
I don't want to. I'm not supposed to kiss girls.
Mwah!
I don't want him here. He's a man. He's a grown-up. He's retarded. Get out of my sight! Ricky, he doesn't know anything about what you're worried about.
Kevin Bacon,
Are we still friends?
Secret friends.
Mary Stuart Masterson, Kathy Moriarty, and introducing Evan Rachel Wood
I always wish for something magical to happen to me.
in a film by Timothy Hutton.
I'll come back for you! I'm here to see Ricky Schroth.
And you are?
His wife.
Harriet!
About the truth that hurts.
You like me now, but you're gonna grow up. I'm not.
And the friendship that heals.
Have you ever been this happy before?
Digging to China.
How's that for a topper?